Okay, everyone, a very warm welcome to what is I presume it's the last seminar before the summer. It's 3 o'clock on June the 30th. Anyone can squeeze in another seminar before the summer, then they're welcome to try. Today, we are delighted to welcome Lidia Manzo, who we know very well in multiple contexts. We welcome her back to Maynooth, as well as welcoming her as a fellow. Lidia's work is around financialization, community regeneration, community development, gender-based approaches, human rights-based approaches that we're going to hear more about today. And she is currently working on a Sklodowska Curie fellowship, individual fellowship, which is, anyone knows about those fellowships, are incredibly prestigious to get. So we're delighted that she's basing part of it in Maynooth. So she's visiting in that, part in that capacity in a project looking at care ethics in the city. She is rooted in the school, Department of Social-Political Sciences in Milan University, but spending some time in Maynooth. But she's also here as a fellow of the Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute. And we have these fellowship schemes that invite people around. Great to have people like Lidia visiting. So she's here in multiple capacities. She spent 2 years on an Irish Research Council fellowship, doing work in a similar kind of vein. She's committed to maintaining ongoing conversations with the communities she works with. It's an important part of it. So it's great she's revisiting and engaging the same issues, and in fact, even in her absence between her IRC postdoc and this visit, she has been keeping in touch with the community and working with the community also. So we're going to stop the introduction there, other than to say we're delighted to have Lidia. Lidia is going to speak for about 40 to 45 minutes. Then there will be an opportunity for people who wish to, particularly the online community, who want to speak or ask a question, to come on. Please do it in the chat function. Alert Anne, who is looking after us today, and Orla. Let them to, in fact, you want to speak. I know a couple of people already indicated they wish to do so. So if you've got questions, put them in the chat, or if you want to speak, please put them in the notify Orla, and we'll be sure to get round to you. We've got about 45 minutes after the presentation for some questions. I should have said that my name is Mark Boyle. I am going to be chairing the session today, and I'm from the Department of Geography, but I am also a fellow here in the Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute. So, Lidia, with that, I'm going to pass over to yourself. Very much looking forward to hearing your talk. Is this a city that cares? So we want an answer to that question by the end of it. So, looking forward.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, people attending in presence. Thank you, people online. I know that there will be people also on the other hand of the globe in Australia that we watch the recording. So I'm very honored by all this attention. And thank you, MUSSI, for resuming the visiting fellowship that's supposed to be in 2020 and then the pandemic. So we are all here, and actually it's a great opportunity also to be here after 2 years of not the pandemic, but actually of research on this matter, so I can try to give you a better conceptualization and a better outcomes, at least of the Irish case study, which is going to be, as I'm going to say, it's in Dublin. So the matter of housing in non-urban communities is very close to me. So this is the point of departure. As I have researched, as Mark was saying, and have spent time with its residents and on the streets of the Liberties since 2015. I came here in 1998, as you can see from the picture, as an ice-breaking moment, but that's another story. So I have reflected through all this time analytically on the injustice of gentrification and regeneration processes at the stake in that particular area of Dublin inner city. And I've come to understand the absolute urgency and necessity for this problem to be further studied. So City of Care contributes to this central and indispensable discussion and fight. So just to set like a little bit the research framework, and what I'm going to do today is going to provide you some theoretical framework, very, very brief methodological overview, and some empirical data, but given the time frame, I really want to go then to the conclusion and open for question and answer for the audience and with the audience, because I'm really looking forward now to understand what I can come up with the City of Care, let's say, manifesto, and we will see very, hopefully at the very end what I mean. So housing is a basic human right and the central element of current financialization processes that can be defined as the increasing dominance of financial actors, markets, practices, measurements, and narratives at various scales, resulting in a structural transformation of economies, firms, including financial institutions, states, but also households. So housing recommodification in Europe has created new markets for financial investors. And we have witnessed a shift in the conception of housing from a right to a good to an asset, entailing the state's withdrawal from this welfare pillar and the transition toward marketized arrangement, especially of the social rented housing sector. So this shift from social housing for the general population since the 70s towards the narrowing of this form of tenure to house mainly very people from across Europe has been determined by neoliberal policies such as the privatization, so tenant purchase and transfer to non-state agencies of social rented housing stock, reduce investments in provision and maintenance, and also subsidizing the private housing market through home ownership supports that has transformed social housing systems across Europe since the 80s. So it is since the 80s that in the majority of countries, the number of applicants also for social housing has actually increased. So this is a very dense slide, and it's just to provide you also a political economic framework, which is very important to my discussion, which is about neoliberal reform and the problematization of social housing, which is a complex process involving unequal, multi-scalar, multidimensional, and unlimited restructuration that generates its own failures, crises, and contradiction. From a neoliberal perspective, only children, elders, or people with disabilities are considered naturally vulnerable and legitimately deserving of social assistance. You can already see, from the words, how this is very wrong. So those in need of support who fail to embody these norms are projected as lazy and undeserving. Accordingly, neoliberal reforms transfer social care responsibilities toward the markets, local governments, communities, families, and the individuals themselves. So housing is seen as an individual responsibility, investment, and asset. So cuts to governmental funding have put this pressure on either the redevelopment or the privatization of social housing complexes, exacerbating processes of displacement and contributing to the erosion of community fabric and weakening of social bonds. And this is actually the point from which I started thinking and designing the City of Care project, because I was already working in another project about gentrification of the liberties, and I came across the community of Oliver Brown flats. That could be like another kind of flats community in inner city Dublin or in other parts of Ireland. And there I found something that is always invisible, which is the system of support and solidarity for disadvantaged households, particularly the most vulnerable. Lone mothers, single women pensioners, and single women without children. And from this understanding, I came back to the theory, and I came back to the political economic framework, and I designed City of Care. So how can we conceptualize social housing communities through an ethic of care? It's a kind of an effort to make visible, revision, and revalue the caring possibilities and constraints of housing, to ask how housing systems are enabled or constitute a barrier to relational care within households. It's a way to understand the urgent modes of valuing care that operate to housing. And these are political questions about the ways that care is imagined and patterned through housing systems. So there has been a lot of discussion about care since the pandemic outbreak. This project was actually designed in 2019. So I am very, very glad that also this discussion about the concept of care has been taking place, because it really helped also me to reflect better on this concept, which is like, as an ethic, is generally understood to apply primarily in the domain of personal relations, or at least of one-to-one encounter. But some theorists have made tentative moves towards applying the standard of care in the more public and impersonal worlds of social policy and politics. So my emphasis here is on insisting that states recognize the centrality of giving and receiving care, of taking care, and of caring about others. So the project has also like a gender lens and look at women caring networks in vulnerable poor communities. Caring as a distinctive network-based activity is one of the central elements in the survival practices of disadvantaged areas of the city. Yet it remains a gendered activity that develops between women and their community members under significant structural constraints. So the research wanted to understand the mechanism of such women life practices of networked solidarity and community empowerment, as I believe it's crucial to approach this issue of care beyond its dominant notion of simply labor or simply love. So these ethics actually recognize caring as a universal need. So we are shifting from neoliberal understanding, neoliberal approaches to needs and to individual responsibilities to universal need. So since individuals are fragile, vulnerable, and will at various points be giving and receiving care. So we all know now that neoliberal public-private partnership has triggered a wave of speculation, solicitation, harassment, displacement, and gentrification in anticipation of larger-scale development opportunities. And I believe there are colleagues in the online audience that have been working on this very well, especially in Ireland. So the opportunity structures, the asset that presently and historically exist actually in these vulnerable neighborhoods are always overlooked, ignored, and disrespected by these policies. And if left unaddressed, the situation will continue to plague the city, but not only the city of Dublin. Okay, this is a concept framework, is a diagram that put together like the idea, the manifesto of the city of care, with these three main components that are social capital, community infrastructure, and affordable housing. So social capital is going to, I'm not going to put a lot of time in this explanation, but then I'm very open to discussion maybe later. So social capital particularly look at the agency of residents, and particularly in multi-generational women-led social support networks that actually can have an outlet, a political outlet. Community infrastructures look at the critical brokering practice of community-based organization that can really help organize for housing justice. And then, of course, we really need affordable housing, and we really need, governments and urban policies and policymakers to take this into account. Drawing on an ongoing ethnographic research, this case study that I'm presenting today here illustrates the extensive and multi-generational network of social ties and social capital which have developed over 80 years in an Irish social housing flat estate of an inner city Dublin neighborhood. This is the case of the Liberties, an inner city area located in the southwestern section of Dublin, traditionally an industrial labor intensive area characterized by a vibrant working class community, local social support structures, and a 30% concentration of social housing. The Liberties has been subjected to various waves of gentrification since the early 90s. It has been one of the targets of the city neoliberal and entrepreneurial urban policies that have instigated the redevelopment and repackaging of the district's old-fashioned shops, abandoned buildings, and lower-grade function. For those not knowing Dublin very well, it's also the place where the Guinness factory actually is. These entrepreneurial policies have instigated and have created a narrative that presents the neighborhood a powerhouse for creative industries and cultural tourism, presenting the neighborhood as innovative, exciting, and safe place to be and to invest in. And these are like really the urban planning narratives, it's not my words. Social housing flats in Dublin are characterized by framing narratives like flats are the cause and not the solution to processes of socioeconomic marginalization and segregation. They lie in significant disrepair, hardly any public funding is available for new housing, and many are located in inner city areas where actually land values and the appetites of real estate speculators have increased dramatically, and flats have become enclaves in high-value neighborhoods, providing affordable housing to those who would not otherwise be able to live there. As such, they also serve as an important decelerator of gentrification. Up to that point, I'm not sure. Specifically, the case study is about the Oliver Bond flats in Dublin's Liberties. This is 16 blocks of social housing built in the 30s, home to 3 generations and almost 12,000 people. And the area has a history of impoverishment, but during the 20th century, jobs were offered by the surrounding industries, especially textiles. But since the 70s and the 80s, its residents have suffered of joblessness because of the post-industrial disinvestment in many of our cities around the world, prison for males, school dropping out, teenage pregnancies, state assistance, drug addiction, and crime. Photographs are very beautiful and have been made by a professional photographer that worked with me in the project, Luigi Fagion, I like to mention. So Oliver Bond has been in a desperate need of work for years. The size of households, an average 2-bedroom flat in the complex, is about 48 square meters compared to a new build standard of 70 square meters, where a 2-bed flat means that a majority of families in the complex are underhoused. The age of the flats and corresponding issues such as dampness and non-dependable service costs featured in the day-to-day functionality of households and the impact on the physical and mental health, as well as the dignity of residents. In addition to this, Oliver Bond is chronically underserved by appropriate recreation areas for children and young adults, and by appropriate parking, rubbish disposal facilities, and shared space. So I'm providing you a very brief overview of empirical data, just to give you an idea to go then forward to discuss the conclusion. So it's really like a very brief section of a very long ethnography. And I focused the presentation today with data collected during the COVID, because I thought they were not just more recent, but also more like probably felt more by the community. So back on March 2021, Oliver Bond Residents Group distributed a survey containing 7 simple questions about environmental conditions to all 397 units within the estate, with the support of the local community development project Robert Emmett. And these are the results, not surprisingly. The vast majority of people in Oliver Bond are living with damp, mold, and cold. About a third doesn't have cold or hot running water. A third has problems with pests, including rats, and 2/3 don't have adequate vermin-free refuse storage. These are not just sideline or minor complaints. The evidence outlined in the report describe a living condition clearly in breach of residents' right to adequate housing that must be habitable in terms of providing the inhabitants with adequate space and protecting from cold, damp, heat, rain, wind, and other threats to health, structural hazards, and disease vectors. We are literally sick, waiting physically and mentally, said Lynette Lyons, a member of the residents group. We decided then to go on the media with it, because like that, with the broken promises, and she refers to the city, who is actually the landlord, Dublin City Council. We have done all the work that City Council asked us to carry out over the last 10 years. So the residents actually went to the media campaign 3 months after the report. My idea is also to put health into social housing. And the big problem is that one barrier to develop effective housing policies is also the lack of information on housing quality at the community level. And we really need assessments of housing estates, organized community advocacy group that can effectively balance this landlord influence. And I have found that community development organization, housing alliances, and neighborhood initiatives are the main channels for making the voices of vulnerable tenants heard. So if you remember the original diagram where we have like social capital, so we have the networks, and we have policies on affordable housing that are not really working very well, not as the condition you saw. And then we have like the community infrastructure. You might start to hopefully follow what I am, the journey I'm bringing you with me. So this is just a slide to remind some of the audience that might not be very into this discussion that the 2017 UN Special Rapporteur for Housing sets out how unregulated global capital, so we're back in the financialization, not only rapidly distorts real estate markets, but also disconnect housing from its social function of providing a place to live in security and dignity. So here we have financialization. We have also rights that should be for everyone. And then we have on the background is neoliberalism. So housing rights are becoming significant as a tool for highlighting needs and raising housing standards across the world. And these rights are now an integral part of economic, social, and cultural rights within international human rights instruments. And I believe, we have also Rory Hearn. I believe we have him in the audience, and he might want to say something for complementary on this matter. So I'm going to throw a little discussion, maybe 10 minutes of some data to give you a sense, the flavor of the research, and then I'm going to wrap up for the conclusion. So what I found, particularly last summer, it was an idea of housing as not really a safe place, bringing everyday uncertainties. So almost the opposite of what we all think when you think about home. So to be honest, it's not even housing to even describe it. It's not even livable to live for anybody to live in, to be honest. It's absolutely horrendous. It's very frustrating. And I want to draw your attention to this last quote, because then in the next slide we're going to see a picture. But this quote talks about smell. And I can't give you the idea of smell in a presentation. I can give you a visual idea, I can talk on it, but I can't make you smell what actually Caroline is smelling every day in her place. She smells mold, and she's getting paranoid about that because she's thinking, also about her reputation. So people coming in might think that I'm not actually a person. And this is Caroline. And this is inside of that. So people actually open the door within calling to me and the photographer. So there are also concerns about displacement and distrust in local authorities. And this lady actually is telling me that it's hard to keep going about the damp and cold, about the lack of safety and security, about the state of the common areas, about the lack of play areas. And some of these excerpts are also online on the website of the research. There is a section called Dublin Multimedia, and there are rough cuts of some interviews where people allow me to publish their videos, so they're also their identity online, saying these exact things. So this lady is talking about distress and risk of antisocial behavior. And she ended saying how this situation is not good for the soul, it's not good for the heart, it's not good for the head, talking about health, like mental health, physical health. These people think that have been neglected for years by Dublin City Council. They think when they decided to go for the media campaign last summer that it was time to get out and stand strong and let them see that we are the strongest community. These are ordinary people, mainly women, so they are not politicians. They are not like people working in PR, people used to do this. We can't be walked on. I think it was just time for a change. So health inequities are actively produced and can be resisted. They are the final operation, the impact of an interlocking system of politicized, institutionalized, and interpersonal practices that effect social exclusion with reference to health financing markets. And this mechanism can be called health discrimination. So we started from the city of care, and we are ending up talking about health discrimination. Because actually housing contributes to the accumulation or depletion of the health capital of individuals and communities. So what I also found is that alongside this level of neglect and decline of the Oliver Bonn-Flex state, there was evidence of an enduring social fabric and strong community spirit, where residents have mobilized support from within the community, making substantial progress in dealing with all this drug culture, dereliction, and antisocial behavior. So now we are talking about the social capital idea. And here I'm referring to the idea of activist mothering from Nancy Naples to the logical succession from Bayat. And I want to first read this quote, which kind of explains how the community is actually being built. Through tenants association, fine. But these people always talk about a matriarchal society, and this was so interesting for me as an ethnographer to understand better. So they try to explain, like, in the past and nowadays, they're the same. You did nothing wrong in your flats, because these women were standing if there were drugs coming and they were stood at the gates, and they prevented all of that happening. They marched for much better conditions for the city. I'm going to be more precise about that in a while. So what I want to underline is this cross-generational continuity of community work performed by women living and working in low-income communities that demonstrate the complex way in which gender and class contribute to the social construction of networks of care through housing. So in this research, I found extensive networks of kin and friends supporting, reinforcing each other, devising schemes for self-help in which their social, emotional, and economic lives are so intertwined to be able to produce strategies for survival in a community of severe economic degradation. The material and cultural support that has absorbed, sustained, and socialized community members in Oliver Bonn House is provided by networks of kin or friends, but also from more or less formal local institutions and associations, particularly in this case from Robert Emmett Community Development Project. Women play the central role in social capital processes in low-income communities, yet their leadership often lacks visibility and legitimacy. I observed Oliver Bonn women arrange for money for families in need, or provide clothes for children arrive to the city, a sack of groceries to get through the end of the month, fundraising for the children's summer trips, but also emotional support, fostering community relationships, mediating between the public world of schools, social services, medical care, and all sorts of everyday interaction that form the backbone of social capital. Here we have Rona talking about these women. Again, that they will pull people off the step and they wouldn't be afraid. They were very strong women. But there were also people, that would take a stand in their community. And they were good organizers, working class women, good organizers. As they were able in the past to help other women and other families, and also, to organize for the very famous rent strike in 1972, that they went up for 18 months. And the committee, this lady says, that my mommy was involved with was part of NATO, what they call the National Tenants Organization. This is a kind of an historical document. And what is most important for my final argument is that even though these women didn't realize they were political, they were actually very political. So the women I met in this Flats community view citizenship as something achieved in their community and for the benefit of the collectivity rather than an individual possession. So we are really like on the care side rather than the neoliberal one. As residents of poor communities, many of the women describe how the deteriorating condition as well as the inadequate education and health services that threatened their children's growth and development fostered an ongoing commitment to community work. Their own mothers helped interpret experiences with classism and segregation and instill in their daughters a belief in their ability to overcome these obstacles. At the moment, in Oliver Bond, there are really 3 generations of women. And as they always say to me, men do nothing. So I don't want to stress this thing, but it's really a matriarchal society. Because sometimes they are the only one under which the flat, and under which name the flat is. It's because they receive also welfare for the children, and most of the time, fathers are just gone. So they really talk about grassroots activism and witnessing a lot of pain of the people's struggle, because we are on the front line of community activism. We are the vanguard. This is an amazing political narrative. And they say, because they don't have any political education, but they're actually doing grassroots political activism. I found that bonding social capital is foundational as it lies in the structural sources of poverty. And this ethnography has shown how urban disadvantaged communities still rely on their social capital to aid in survival when other forms of capital have been lacking. The hollowing out of the welfare state has left the most vulnerable categories with fewer state protections and buffers. We now need significant and empirical studies to explore the ways in which social capital in disadvantaged communities is used and accumulated to convert it to political capital and civic action. So my idea is to understand these forms of social capital emerging from participatory democracy, how they might invigorate the dynamics of local governance, where the meaning of citizenship is being allowed out by macroeconomic global processes and the ensuing change in the welfare state. So local organization and citizen participation in them as the most important experience of citizenship and the means for establishing social and community balance. So this accumulation of social capital is what, in my view, makes democracy work. I just want to show you this diagram. It's just an example based on the interactions between the community of Oliver Bond social housing and the local community development project, Robert Emmett, how they were able, starting from this very rich and powerful source of bonding social capital, to develop region social capital using human capital, acquiring financial resources, built spaces to possibly end up with cultural capital and the empowerment of these women, like during this media campaign, during these political lobbying activities and political activities. So I'm just now trying to draw you to the conclusion. I have more or less 10 minutes and I will try to do that, to stay on time. So many of the progressive community-based development groups, as we saw in the previous slide, but also environmental justice, community economic development advocates, and others, have over the years have played a key role in stabilizing and revitalizing their neighborhoods. And there are profound interconnections between mutual supports, public space, sharing resources, and community life. And all this is reinforcing in my mind the idea that localized forms of democracy both more possible and are both more possible and more obviously important. But how do we scale them up? So let's try to think about a city that cares. So it's like the question that is driving all the presentation today. I put attention to social networks and norms of reciprocity as an essential ingredient in the urgent struggle for social justice. I also put attention on non-political forms of social capital, and particularly, explicitly, political forms that are required for policy reform that applies an equitable care. So care and capital and collective care capital are deeply intertwined and need to be accounted for in mobilizations for housing justice. So housing is not a unidimensional commodity, and the fight for housing justice should not be with the sole outcome of increasing supply for those in greatest need. It must fold in care, and this is really my point, and the public collective provisioning of it into its discursive and material strategies and outcomes. So this is, again, is another visualization of these relationships among elements of community development. So when actually we place the game at the community level. So we have, of course, like services like adult education after school, but we also have like people from communities, from neighborhood organizations working together and trying to support adequate housing and trying to develop community consultation and lobbying and all these other things. So to be truly democratic, to me, involve forms of municipal care, city care, that put an end to corporate abuse, generate cooperatives, and replace outsourcing with insourcing. So we can create cooperative communities that are co-produced, that enable us to connect, to deliberate, and to debate, to find joy and flourish, and to support each other's needs. Care is threaded through the housing system, through the practices and modes of organization that sustain the work of household care, but also community care, capital building. So conceptually, housing studies can move from this vantage toward the care analysis of housing system, to consider the care work practices at the community level. So to me, attention must also turn to the ways that care circulates in an embodied way, or simply embedded in the world, environments, infrastructures that have been marked by care. And the ways that housing cares with the residents. So am I talking about an alternative urbanism? And here I'm shifting more from the social to the geographical part of this presentation. So the city, I might have a very romantic view of the city, and that's something. But the city is also a place, where people from all over the world interact in networks, have the potential to meet and make common cause. But cities are also sites of clashes over the production of space, services, and human rights. And central to this idea is that everyone, particularly the disenfranchised, not only has a right to the city, but as inhabitants, has a right to shape it, design it, operationalize it, and an urban human rights agenda. Dublin today is an exclusive city. I think the country is growing, but everywhere people are getting too greedy. And this quote is talking about the Celtic Tiger, as about during the Celtic Tiger actually didn't communities, vulnerable social housing communities, didn't get a huge amount out of the benefits. They are poor now, but they will be poor tomorrow. I think it's a very nice way to place this idea of the effect of entrepreneurial and neoliberal urban policies, particularly in Dublin, is that the only thing that they got off the title was its hoppers, its fleas. I had actually to look for definition of hoppers. So, looking at local solutions, care ethics drive communities to step up to meet emerging and pressing needs while governments withdraw. But can communities alone and the associated ideas of moral cohesion, rights, and care deliver on this agenda? My answer is no. I'm not leaving this question. Is another city possible? And geographically, what a caring society looks like spatially? Which care support is needed? And is this democratic? Does the city have the capacity to mediate between governments, economies, and communities? What a caring society looks like spatially. Are we talking about caring democracies again? So I'm playing with, this is the final slide. I'm playing, of course, with the name of the area. Talking about an idea of taking the liberties of care. Caring city has both a particular approach to values of care, but it is also a city. And we need to situate and understand how to care. How do we fix care and support care? And so, how do we fix society? We have to fix it spatially. And I would like to open to the audience with this idea about what vision of the liberties do we want, especially for the Irish audience, and what will it look like in 20 years. And I thank you for the attention, and I want to leave this final slide with this quote by Herbert Marcuse saying that the housing crisis doesn't exist because the system isn't working, it actually exists because that's the way the system works. And thank you so much.
Well done, Lidia. That was fantastic, and really, no matter how many times you hear the story, it provokes all sorts of I don't know, feelings of resentment, of bitterness, of the need to anger, I suppose, the need to protest, and it's an old story in many neighbourhoods, but it's a story that's never resolved and continues to enrage. Okay, apart from what are hoppers, which I think I'm going to have to ask later, Lydia, open for no questions at the moment or comments, I think, from any of the audience online. If you're online and you want to make a comment or you want to speak to the talk, please do drop a note in the chat function or the Q&A function. But for now, we'll stick to some questions in the room. And so I'll open it up. Anyone want to begin?
We'd love you to take your shirt off and put your hand up like that.
No, you wouldn't want me to take the shirt off. You might want to put your hand up.
Can I ask you a question about I guess my question is really around this kind of ethics of care versus social justice. Because the ethics of care is really around reciprocity, right? It's about caring for each other and about it's much more kind of local, and it's about support, and it's about coping within the system and so on. Whereas social justice would be much more around rights and around tackling the system. Like if we were to go to the Marcuse quote, like the ethics of care is really about coping and it's about support, but it fundamentally doesn't change the neoliberal system and the political economy, right? So my question is like, is it enough to care? And will the liberties be fundamentally different in 20 years' time if the political economy and the financialization and so on doesn't shift?
I don't know if I can answer and then we collect other questions, or we want to collect questions first.
I think we may just deal with one at one and that's the arrive, Lydia.
Is not enough here. Okay. I see the interconnections and the cooperation between human rights and that more general social justice idea, where like rights reminds to me, of course there is a moral behind, the rights framework, of course. But the ethics of care is also like a moral sphere, which is actually gives visibility. It's more like, it's not just a narrative, but it's an idea of giving visibility and giving rights to those invisible, even just at the local level. So I can see, I don't have a perfect answer about how to, destroy neoliberalism and, fix the system, fix society.
I think the question is a bit about how do you scale the ethics of care, and how do you scale beyond the flats of the economy?
This is very interesting, and it's nice because it's always like the idea of, we are at the micro level and we want to scale and to bring in this at a systemic level. And I don't have an answer, but I think that if we recognize these rights of caring at the local level, we can really at least make local communities work toward empowerment. So empowering these people and make them, emerge from like a survival, so staying local and surviving, to a more like political level. At least maybe at the urban city level. It's very idealistic, I understand that. I don't have a full answer, but
I think
that's
just
also part of the problematization of this.
Maybe just to explore it a little bit further. On the care ethics front, I think Rob's critique historically has been valid, the neo-Nordings and Gilligan and so on, but I noticed, Lydia, you referred to in Toronto, and Toronto's work is all about the ethics of care being deeply political. It's about mapping and understanding the distribution of care burdens, who cares where, how, and then aligning state supports in order to incubate those care networks. So it would see social justice has been practiced through political and economic structures that support caring networks and allow caring networks to scale them themselves. I don't know if you want to comment a bit more on Jean Toronto's work, and particularly, I think your addition, which I think is really important, is that to fix society, to fix communities, we need to fix society, as Marcus said. But to fix communities and to fix society, we need also to fix space. So I wonder if you could maybe reflect a little bit more on how care ethics in the liberties plays out, or should play out, because exactly is the liberties, is a specific community anchored in a particular place. I think that's a really strong addition to Toronto's work. You're adding space. What would liberties look like spatially if it was subjected to an ethics of care?
I am going back to show if I can draw on this. Let me see. Okay, you can see it. So I think that at the local level, let's say at the liberties level. So here you have from the table. Okay. So here you can really see how you have like basic needs, like those basic community development needs, like adult education, after school, But then you kind of having like this social justice and also ethics of care, in my view, idea of also working to end systemic inequality, ending territorial stigmatization. Of course, it's not really that one community development center and its flat community is going to have like systemic inequality or racism, but it's like the underlying idea of these relationships that are based on social capital developed in the community, bonding kinds of relationship, but also political outlets and forms of empowerment that might be able not only to provide basic needs to the community, but also to support for adequate housing, to do community consultation, to actually lobbying DCC by lobbying in 6 months from the report that was issued on the inadequate housing condition. After 3 months, they went for a media campaign. After 3 months, from September, October 2021, they set a regeneration forum. So they're actually sitting, this community in the Liberties of Oliver Bond is sitting every month with BCC people, with other technocrats, and with other like councillors to discuss. Maybe this is not going to solve the problems, but at least they are having like a platform and they are having a conversation about the future of their regeneration of their flats. And then again, I'm always looking to Rob, because now, every time I'm gonna think about from how to scale it from micro to macro, I'm gonna think about you and the way you pose the question, because I didn't find anything in the literature, and I'm still thinking about that. So I don't know if I am just too idealistic to only think about the community level, but I would say that these people, that they don't have other forms of capital and they can only rely on social capital, at least they're doing something. As you know, their mothers were like able to win the rent strike in the 70s, these grassroots. And I think it's also genuinely very good, to make emerge these outcomes from very stigmatized communities where there is only one narrative, and it's always more about criminality and drug dealings, but there is a lot of new things that are kind of reshaping the conversation, at least at the city level.
Thanks, Rob. Rob always asks the different questions. Don't worry, I'm delighted he doesn't. Be worried if he doesn't. Can I just go to an online question? I don't know. Sharon Zukin, Sharon, we're absolutely thrilled to bits that you've tuned in today. I don't know if you want to come online and ask the question yourself. We have got it set up that we can do that, or do you want me just to read the question out?
Thank you for your efforts and to present me, and thank you, Lidia, for a brilliant presentation of the care ethic and practice. But I have a hard question. I live in New York, as you know. The city government has a historic commitment to a big physical infrastructure of public housing, in addition to quite a few subsidized rent apartments, although never enough subsidized rent apartments. And the gigantic problem is that the public housing physical infrastructure is degenerating, it's old, and it desperately needs huge capital investment of many billions of dollars. But even though the scale of physical infrastructure is smaller in other US cities, they also need gigantic capital investment for new water pipes, for example, or to deal with toxic air quality. Can the care paradigm, as interesting and ethical and pragmatic as it can be, how can it deal with this big problem of capital investment?
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, I thought Rob Kitchen had asked the toughest question, but that maybe just trots Rob. Great question that gets to the heart of the matter. Lidia, do you want to have a go?
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much for attending. I don't have an answer, but I think that's also it's the same problem I'm observing in Milan, which is the other case study, and it's also the main starting problem for this social housing in Dublin. It's like it's a sort of like it's a political geography of the maintenance, because it's like after so many years of building these housing estates, and with the retrenchment of welfare system from this sort of economic providing this providing finance for these services, we are now left with the question: do we have to accept public-private partnership to be able to regenerate these estates? But as I said before, this has been proven to fail the affordable housing issue. So if we bring on financial aid to private financial aid to the public one, then the thing is that has been proven by many examples, not only in Dublin but also in other cities around the world, that we are going to live maybe for like the 20% of affordable housing. So I don't have an answer, unfortunately, about which model will be better, for city governments that are actually in charge as landlords, and they are actually enriched, I think it's the pronunciation, of these housing adequacy rights, and they also might genuinely don't have the economic resources, to build up the maintenance of these very big complexes. So I don't know if this can be a question that anybody from the audience want to provide an answer, just to try to problematize the financial conversation.
Sharon, do you want to get back in with that, or we're more than welcome? We'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Well, no, thank you. I certainly agree with Lidia that when private financial institutions become involved with making repairs to public housing, they do demand that they have the right to create market rent housing or on the property of public housing estates. But I don't have any answer. I mean, there are answers such as create, at least in the United States, legal systems. There are answers in the form of creating different kinds of public ownership or collective ownership of housing, but somebody still has to come up with the money to repair, and in many cases, well, in the case of mold, or in the case of repairing roofs, repairing elevators, and so on, that's a huge amount of money to come up with. Maybe the capital is in the society, it exists in the society, but in other pockets. So it's really difficult, and nobody is talking about recreating sweat equity, where people put in their own labor to repair physical structure, especially because a lot of these repairs require more heavy equipment and more construction expertise than tenants have. So I don't have any answers, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I think my view on it, I see Curie ethics as profoundly caught up with municipal tax and fiscal policy. It isn't some you can think of it as a community, cultural, social capital that somehow can operate in any given social and economic environment. But if we start to think about care-led polity, how would you structure the political organisation of the distribution of municipal finance that was distributed according to a care ethic to support care and to create equitable care? Because it's always some neighbourhoods that are doing more care work than others, and greater care burdens than others in the city relies on them obviously to survive. Again, they never reward it or incentivise it or support it. One thing I would just say to that from my perspective, I think municipal finance is going to be the most complicated, the most absolute. The new financial instruments that are coming around, municipal bonds and so, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So how a community can understand community finance when these local authorities are hiring one or two accountants is I think the legibility of it and the interpretability and intelligibility of municipal finance actually is opaque. And it says political ends and it is opaque because only some people can then speak to it. Sophie Malson is slightly full of travel, Sharon, yourself. In fact, she's flown all the way from Australia for today's lecture. Thank you for making the trip for specifically this lecture, Sophie. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Worth it. Thank you for a great presentation, and it paints a pretty grim picture, but very similar to what we see at home. But I'm going to ask an easy question because I think you've had enough difficult ones. And I'm wondering as well that maybe this can help us sort of from thinking about it. And you talk about rent strike and some other various sort of activist events that have happened over the years. I'm very unfamiliar with what's happened there, so I'm wondering what impact they actually had in this kind of, and again, thinking about if we do in this care framework, and maybe then linking that perhaps to, I'm going to say it wrong, but Delacaz's work on the speculative nature of the ethics of care. So maybe there's something about these events that can speculate for a better alternative future. I know, again, a bit idealistic, but if you could sort of talk about those.
For me, the simple question. Because I'm going to ask a simple one. It's like,
I think it's a very complex one, but it's not because I want to make it a complex answer. It's because that's actually the point. Because when I started designing the project, I was just struck by this community care and this bonding relationships, every day. And then because I was already researching on gentrification and other people, told me not only from the flats complex, but also from other parts of the liberties. And they were talking about this matriarchal society and this, because when we talk about care ethics, we're talking about morals and ethos. So it is all very soft and invisible, but it's something that has been built. We can call it through socialization processes, like multi-generational kind of education from mother to daughters. But it's that kind of, those events made me think about that kind of grassroots activism that is really inscribed in everyday practices. So I don't remember now if in one of these quotes, I didn't read exactly all the words of the quotes, but there was this lady, which is very vocal in the Pimlico social housing area. I'm not giving the name, you can guess. And she was only 10 years old when her mother, that was of course more vocal than her during the rent strike, march and protest and so on, but she had to work, and she left the 10 years old, daughter, marching, keeping the place as the mother was coming back, maybe during the evening time. So it is this form of education. It is this form of exchanges for survival, exchanging not only for basic needs but also emotional needs and political support. That, in my view, is it's very invisible, it never emerged, but it's not only it's good to tell society we have this very good social capital. It's also an idea of placing these care relationships on a more political level. And it can happen, just by looking at these networks in social housing communities. But it might happen if we, first of all, try to give financial infrastructure and spatial and built infrastructure to specific neighborhood organization, housing alliances, and all these things to make them work together, work on the empowerment of these communities, work on the actual education, so the cultural capital of these people. Also to be able to make these people have a voice when they have to talk with Dublin City Council. It's just, I did Dublin City Council because sometimes it's just very difficult, you are coming from two different complete let's say social class, level of education, they don't speak the same language. But if you empower these people, and this is the caring, so it's a very complex infrastructure of care, understanding of care within this spatial example, this community. Did I answer?
Yes, thank you.
And it's nice to meet you in person because I know you from the literature.
Thank you. Likewise. I know you.
Yeah, she's the wittiest Twitter person. So I wanted to, Lydia's point, I think, is a crucial one that we're all sick of it. We're sick of getting these community regeneration, and it just, you see billions washing through a place or not billions washing through a place, and the same old problems, So we need at some stage to enough. The way the dominant approach to regeneration is not working. So care ethics is that disruptive framework that is then the moment where we say, okay, well, it's not enough to say enough. We need to say enough, and here's an alternative. Can I bring maybe something from the community themselves? I know Lydia's been working with you. I don't know if you have any thoughts yourself about what lies beyond enough is enough.
Me, I totally love what Lydia's doing. We met about 5 years ago. We have differing opinions on certain things, but to me, if you look at Google and Sean McDermott Street, look at that disconnect. That's at least 15, 20 years of money being ploughed into one area, 500 metres away, no change in 20 years. So to talk about the liberties, all those social housing blocks, they're at the end of their natural lifespan. So it's not just the bond, it's also going into Mercer, going into Dig Street, going into Michael Malin, going into Pimlico. So you have and then you have a land value. So if you're looking at the geography of the liberties, a proposed hotel was sold by 3 of an acre for 15 million. So for people from Dublin City Council, and maybe people from the bond should be in Dublin City Council as opposed to understanding each other's language. But if you're looking at an area like the Liberties with 25, 30,000 people, they don't see that. You just see that land value of 50 million. So how do we get a soccer pitch? Kicking and screaming. Did Sporting Liberties get 40 groups together to actually go, why can't you give up your car park, Dublin City Council? Because we need a full-size soccer pitch. And that's wrong finger. It'll be the same. Thank you for your commentary on Oliver Bond. Yes, we agree that there is a problem with ventilation, with mold. Yes, we will sit down together and work out a plan starting in 2026. So it's always the long finger. But while that longer finger's going on, you have some great, I totally agree with your women, you've such really strong women, but I see those women reaching their 50s and their 60s now, and I don't know if they can be replaced. And I don't know if the people like me, I'm 50, and I'm losing the will to fight anymore. I really am, because you're just hitting your head against a brick wall, and it's crumbs you're being fed, to be honest about it. And I'm just getting more and more cynical, and that's really unfortunate, because cynicism is what's going to kill us. We need Lydia's optimism, we need your optimism, and I don't have it anymore. I'm doing stuff with the built heritage, and I've been told to stop. Don't want to fight anymore, so 300-year-old counts.
And is it, what's your meaning of opening liberties and extent conflict, or is it just an exhausted? It was exhausted.
I have been attending the Oliver Bond Regeneration Forum since October, I think. And it's a constant on and off of hope, willingness to change, and then desperate, feelings that anything would be significant for those changes. And I also understand we are living in a different political moment if we compare those women that used to march during the 70s and the 80s. So it's not just generational in terms of like different people, but like now the battles are more played like online, on the media, a little bit less. Not every battles, because it was just pre-pandemic, all the battles around like homelessness in other parts of the city of Dublin, so it's not always the case. There is a generational difference. I can see that the people now struggling for this specific regeneration in Oliver Bond are mostly like women in their 40s and the 30s, 40s. So it's the, let's say, daughters, granddaughters of those matriarchs. I think idealistically and positively, it's always good to try. It's because at least you can make it slower and organize yourself maybe for a better condition. I'm not sure like speculative gentrification forces will surrender in the city of Dublin, but at least it's always worth a try. And I think it's like the very same idea of having social housing complexes that more or less act as a buffer of gentrification, up to the point they're not going to displace all the people to regenerate those complexes. That's in the future. And about the liberties will look like in 20 years old, it's really a matter of how social housing complexes are going to be treated in the next 15, 20 years.
Could you imagine an alternative form of social housing? So, for example, has there been any conversation about the idea of collective cooperative ownership and actually taking housing off of DCC? Forming your own housing association, getting professional help from well-established housing associations, getting professional managers in, that would actually give access into finance, because housing associations have access into finance that local authorities wouldn't have. But it would be a risk in that you're stepping away from the municipality, but it might be an opportunity in that you take collective ownership and potentially find a different route. I'm not suggesting, I'm not actually directly suggesting, I'm just as a scenario that they might have talked about.
Some of them actually already explored that opportunity many years ago. I know some of these now grandmothers that went to Liverpool to explore their model to bring it back into Oliver Bond. The thing is that as we started the discussion about neoliberalism and the undeserving people, so there are people that actually have stable jobs and they pay their social housing rent, and and they really love to live in Oliver Bond, and they would be very willing to buy their home, their apartment, and fix it, maybe cooperatively. The thing is that it's such a huge estate, and you can't, it's not like having like a single house. So you have to make everybody in the block and, you know, really, and having the financial resources to do that. And you have very different people living over there with different economic capacities and different family outlines, and it's very difficult. So it can be a solution.
Well, I wonder if an alternative then, so I've just
No,
I'm just spinning lines here.
Yeah.
The alternative then would be rather than a public-private partnership, would be a public-cooperative partnership. So that's the dream, yeah. You know, so the municipality would look after the those who couldn't.
Those who are like social welfare.
Can I just ask as well, you mentioned that getting towards the end of their lives, does the city have any long-term sort of demolition, rebuild, sort of like Sydney's very good at letting social housing run down and then like going, sorry everyone, you have to move out to places where you have no infrastructure, and then we're going to build a mix where only like a few of you live and build it. Yeah. Is that
They done it in Charlemont Street. They moved the social housing into one block, built that. I sort of put it in for park in it and sort of put a few railings around it. And then Google headquarters is moving in. So it's kicking and screaming, anything is done. And at the moment, it's chronic. There's a lot of problems. It's not just the bonds. But to me, if you can keep those communities strong, you keep the spirit of the liberties. But if you're talking about the tenders, perfect social housing 100 years ago, you can't afford to buy them now. So people living in them, like simple things, there's no nursing home in the liberties. If you had that, or a retirement community, you'd be freeing up the housing stock, but you keep freeing things up. But no, I don't see any brains, any planning at all. Good things are done in spite of policy, I suppose,
None
unfortunately.
of my graduates in myth. It's all Absolutely. But the thing I was going to do, just to finish, because I think we're coming out to the half hour, is I think we're all agreed that these regeneration schemes with 40 years of instance of sexism, they don't work. These neighbourhoods 40 years are as struggled as what they were 40 years ago. So you keep saying, well, there's a moment of change. So then people say, oh, well, COVID's come along, and it's a disruptive moment, over to the window, build back better, re-emerge stronger, blah, blah, blah. And even in that context, we find it very hard to have a debate about resistant developer speculative development. So you do get despair where you think, well, actually, this is just going to be the same. The next 40 years will be the same as the last 40 years and nothing change. But the one thing that is, I think, important is that there are small things that can be scaled, and Granby Street in Liverpool is one where Liverpool House in general has been a disaster. But Granby Street is a small street bought out £1 for every house by the residents, £1, and they have, the ownership of it is just vibrant, and they've got street markets, and also in Liverpool they developed something called asset-based community development, and although it can be technocratic, they can kill things, it's actually seeds, the green shoots of maybe just an alternative. And care networks would be one huge asset that would be harnessed and protected as opposed to abused and just disregarded or exploited. So perhaps we can finish off then, Lidia, you are hopeful. So what's your parting conclusion about how we get from here to somewhere better? How do we get to a city of care?
It's written on the back of your computer.
I would leave this answer open for possibly a final provocation piece to be published in Space and Politics.
2026.
No, possibly very soon, a very short provocation, 2,000 words, with the good faith of the editors of the journals.
Yeah, Lidia thought she was coming for a coffee with me, but at the end of it, I extracted a policy, a provocation for Space and Politics. So I really do look forward to seeing you work through some of the issues today. But I think we're going to stop at that. Can I thank everyone, including Sharon in particular, Sharon Sukin. But absolutely, it's a privilege to have you tune in to the seminar today. So thank you very much for that. Thanks to Anne and to Orla for arranging this. It's always seamless, and the seminar will be online, I understand, so the recording of it will be available if those want to distribute it further and tweet and so on. We'd be grateful for it. And can I end, unless you want to say anything more, by just thanking Lidia for a wonderful seminar, ongoing success with her project. She's here to the end of July. You do want the last word, Lidia?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, MUSSI. Thank you, Maynooth.
Okay, thanks everyone. We'll stop there. Thank you for your participation. All the best. Have a good summer.